Uh, I probably should have used asterisk instead of a triple X here, but you don't need to worry about what I'm about to do next. This is actually a conclusion of the first part of what I wanted to do tonight, but we can pause at this point and entertain questions or responses briefly before we take a break.
Well, either tonight or sometime, would you summarize what seems to be any effect or any characteristics of the faith of the Jewish people as it might have been affected by other religions of that day? Maybe some other time if you don't want to get into it tonight.
Well, I'll do a little bit with that in the next section, but it's a really good question, so let me just address it briefly. Most of the stories that we have about conflict or about Israel's reluctance to be loyal to God alone have to do with Canaanite religion. When they entered Canaan, they were tempted by the local religions, and it's really a kind of an obvious thing at some point. I'll give you an example. When I moved to New England to study and also served in a friend's meeting up there, I wanted to grow a garden. And so I asked the local folks, so how do you grow a garden in New England? And they told me, don't plant anything before Memorial Day. And they told me other stuff too. And so I said, hey, these folks know how it works. And so when I did what they said, and, I did pretty well. And I think when Israel moves in, they haven't been agricultural people. And this last generation, they'd basically been nomadic or semi-nomadic people. And they enter Canaan and they're saying, so how do you grow stuff here? And the local folks say, well, the way you grow stuff there is that Baal, the god Baal, makes things grow. And in order to get him to make things grow, like he sends rain, he's a storm god, a fertility god, those things related to each other. Because in Israel, if you didn't get rain, you didn't have crops. So it was kind of an obvious connection. So they say you sacrifice to Baal in this way, or you do these rituals to Baal in this way, and your crops will grow. And so they said, well, okay, we can do that. And so they were tempted for economic purposes, among other things, but probably primarily, to worship Baal so that they would have a good economic outcome. And it reminds me a little of Jesus saying in the New Testament, you can't serve both God and money. But Israel, the covenant with Israel, its expression was be loyal to God alone. You shall have no other gods, right? And instead of Israel accepting only one, God alone, they wanted to do both and. They worshiped Yahweh and they worshiped Baal. And it was that sort of double-mindedness that got them in deep trouble in terms of not being faithful to the covenant, because the whole premise of the covenant was serve God alone. And actually, if you want to use your imagination just a little bit, that's still a modern problem, because we have folks who want to serve God, but they also basically worship particular economic systems, which are the ones that's supposed to make them prosper, even when those economic systems are completely at variance with biblical teaching, with the worship of God. So now they had influence from other countries. They knew of gods from Mesopotamia, particularly when they were in exile in Mesopotamia. There were challenges by the gods there, and they knew gods from Egypt and so on. So it wasn't simply Canaanite, but probably the greatest challenge was the local Canaanite religions, and the prophets and the historians talk about that trouble all the time. Maybe the most fun story is the contest of prophet Elijah with hundreds of prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel about whether who could call fire from heaven to light a sacrifice, but also had to do with rain because they'd had a 3-year drought. Because Elijah said, it's not going to rain here for 3 years or until I say so. And the prophets of Baal, of course, are supposed to make it rain because they have access to their God. Well, they had already failed utterly, but then when you had this big contest on Mount Carmel, that particular story is highly illustrative of that particular contrast or context. And it ends with a huge rainstorm with Elijah's success, which is kind of fun too.